What's your role in working with financiers and developers, and what was it like bringing them all together on the same stage for a discussion today?
Well, ordinarily we're acting for one or the other, and we're trying to either get investment in, or we're trying to apportion risk from our investor client's point of view. So it's great today to be actually able to just have the discussion from an impartial point of view, and not have to take a side and explore all the issues, and maybe try and also look at reinforcing this message that really we're all trying to achieve the same thing. Somebody's trying to get a project deployed, I'm trying to make a return, I'm trying to generate a development fee, but ultimately we're not two sides opposed, it's two sides trying to do the same thing. And I think what came through quite clearly today was that both sides are starting to recognise that, and there's far less of a them and us picture. And ultimately, if there's any them and any us, that's us as a development and a project community, and them as the regulators and grid, with a clear message that we need to be stronger in our voice to lobby those parties or to get behind the industry and make some change.
Absolutely, and I think earlier you were talking about general terms, getting kind of both those sides of the industry, the financiers, the developers, and I guess ultimately the end customers, comfortable with the idea of deploying energy storage.
Yeah.
I mean, what are some of the topics that came up today that, I'm not saying making people uncomfortable, but what would kind of increase that level of comfort and kind of understanding?
We covered a whole range of things. I think the quality of the kit was talked about. I think people seem to be pretty confident in that, but what will support the business case far more effectively is having a couple of years worth of data.
Sure.
A year's worth of performance data, and saying, look, this is what it does, this is how well it works, here are the savings we've generated or the revenues we've made. And I think as soon as investors and customers, end user customers, see that information coming through, then the investment case becomes a lot more easy because it's proven. Sure. It's not just on the strength of a warranty or an availability guarantee or performance warranty. It's actually there, we can see it. So I was interested to hear one of the developers saying, look, we'll make some of the data we've got available because actually we're quite interested in that. It demonstrates confidence in our product, but it also allows the industry to say, look, actually, here's a success story. And I think if the industry is going to have a unified voice and is going to make some impact on a lobbying point of view, then having access to a little bit of this success story and being able to share that and socialise it within the community will actually power the market forward a little bit. And I think that would make the investors happy, the developers happy, and the end customers have got more information and more good news to sell to their internal boards or their finance directors or whatever. So, within the confines of a sensible commercial arrangement, I think let's share a bit of this success. Let's celebrate each other's success, and then create a much stronger story to go back to the regulators and say, come on guys, this is what we need to be doing as an industry.
Sure, and I mean in terms of sharing that success, I mean if you look in terms of the tech industry, especially in things like software, and within energy, I guess Tesla's the big example of kind of open sourcing from the technology side of things. So do you think that kind of, and the reasoning behind that being that, if one company gets stronger and shares their experiences, then everyone as a whole can kind of benefit and accelerate the market together. Is that kind of the principle that
I think that's right. I think it's it can be on many levels. It can be on, let's all just talk about good news, so that message gets starts to multiple. I think it's also on, you don't want to spend hundreds of millions of quid financing or developing the next Betamax. We want to agree that VHS is pretty good. Let's actually go and do that.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about standardising everything, but standardising some things. Let's engage collectively with DNOs. Let's get them into order. They're getting pinged by Ofgem for the way they're dealing with connections in some cases. Let's get together, give them something sensible that represents the industry. Let's also look at EV charging. Let's standardise charge points in the way they draw power. Let's just try and work together just that little bit more. We're still a commercial industry, we're all profit driven, we've all got our incentives, but I think there's some of this iterative performance data. If we share that with, or make it available for review by a wider peer group, then I think that just serves to accelerate the market and everyone benefits.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, if the customer benefits because there's a few pennies off the bill, then we've hit the ideal scenario.
Yeah, of course. And I think one of the things that you said during the talk that I found really interesting was that you said that maybe from your contract lawyer's point of view, there's kind of not so much a standard contract really. Now in kind of technology terms, everyone's asking for the more standardization, the easier it gets to kind of model and scale up those projects. But I guess at this point in the market, like you say, does it keep things interesting for you that there is this variation?
Hey, look,
in contracts?
I mean, for what we do, we like to try and enable these things to happen. We try and encourage deals to take place, but there isn't a rule book. There's no standard way of doing things, and that makes life really interesting for us as a professional advisor because we can just help define what that is.
Sure.
And we're sat in meetings sometimes, people say to us, well, this is market. And you go, it's not market. There is no such thing. And it may be what you did in a solar deal. But we can't apply that same thinking now. We're operating on something very, very different. And yes, there's bits of learning which work. So this question that lawyers always come back to is it market? Well, we're making the market at the moment, and that's really exciting. So whether we're acting for the EPC contractor, or the technology provider, or the developer, or the financier, we're all sort of learning together. And I think as professional advisors, that's a great and exciting place to be, because we can help shape that. We can see our role not just as negotiating the finer points, but trying to bring 2 or 3 different parties together to get a project done. And that's a really satisfying way of going about your day-to-day life.
Sure. And like my understanding is that when you compare it to solar PV financing, which the beauty of that was in its simplicity. I think 25-year PPA contracts, similar length of feed-in tariffs and stuff like that. This is clearly a more complex proposition, isn't it?
It's a very much more complex proposition, and I think if you got used to working on the PPA and the feed-in tariff or the ROCs, you got used to a really quite straightforward and easily modelable return. You knew what it was going to be. It was government backed for 20 or 25 years, and I think there has been a journey whereby the investment community has had to really detach itself from that thinking. And some of the kind of the most sophisticated guys haven't come from that background, and they've come from tech investment.
Right.
And actually they're far more used to the way this is working. And I think it's, from our point of view, there's still a willingness to say, well, what is the aggregation agreement or the FFR agreement? That's the financeable proposition. And you say, well, actually, no. What we're talking about here is an asset. It's an installation and enabling. We've got grid. We've got all the connections. We've got the battery modules itself and the control system. And we've got a world of opportunity where somebody at some point will pay you to do lots of stuff with it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's taking it away from looking at securing and financing on the basis of a revenue stream that is fixed. And saying, actually, okay, we'll get the first part of our Capex repaid in 2 years under FFR or capacity market. But beyond that, somebody's going to pay something. Mm-hmm. And that creates a bit of a grey area. But I think the point was made by Dan from Enesco is that it really, there is a market there. It's not going away. Mm-hmm. And the people who are well placed to take advantage of those market will be those with battery assets deployed and ready to go, and with 2 or 3 years of performance data to really optimise their service and make the most efficiency. So I think that's one of the key differentiators. But from that, it's quite interesting to see that level of thinking still sits in the developers' minds, and they've got to have, so not the developers, the investors, but they've got to have the Capex repaid. What's the best way of doing that? And actually that's swinging their attention towards the behind the meter stuff. Right. Because they're saying, look, we think we can get smaller revenue for those that will pay the battery off after 10 to 12 years based on that repeat engagement with the customer, the efficiencies and the savings and the various different ways you can engage with them. So that's really interesting that their appetite for risk is such that they're thinking, well, behind the meter might work better. It's a smaller outlay.
Right. Yeah. The
return's slower, but it's something we can guarantee more. And I think that's quite interesting. I also think it's quite conservative. I think as someone with exposure to the developer community a lot, then that 3 to 7 year period is a world of opportunity. It's just hard to put a number on it.
Right. Yeah.
And Mike Clark from Become makes the point of saying, look, actually, no one's able to model this. We can give you a range. We can tell you what we think is going to happen. Right. And we can be honest about that. But the drivers for the market, be it EV charging deployment, increasing price and cost, the need for services aren't going to go away. We're still going to require grid services as well. Mean that after 2-3 years, you're still going to have an asset that's incredibly valuable, for which there will be a market and there will be revenue. And I think it's getting investors comfortable with that period, which is going to be a huge upside for them. And I think for them to turn away and say, no, we prefer behind the meter, I think they're missing a trick. But
yeah, I mean, it was really
it leaves the
interesting.
market open for the merchant money.
It's been really interesting that obviously over the last year and a half or so, it's been front of the meter, particularly FR, and latterly the capacity market, which there's some stumbling blocks within that capacity market at the moment. Talking about the derating.
There is, yeah. I mean, it's symptomatic, I think, of the reliance on subsidy, and I think then seeing fixed contract lengths as almost a replacement for that subsidy. And I think you can't go at the market with that view. Yes, it's great to have some fixed term contracts. It's nice if you can amortise the whole capex of the battery on something. That's great.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. You're not going to. Is a reality. And I think you have to detach a little bit away and look at the value of the asset and what it can and will be able to do. You can also, we didn't get onto it today, but talking a little bit about future-proofing, whether you oversize your battery so that it maintains throughput at a certain level. But I think it's having confidence in the overall market, not just in the individual project in front of you. So you've got to sort of think on a slightly broader basis.
I mean, like one of the other things that I've heard quite a lot today, and not just in that session, was that National Grid are looking to overhaul and change things like the triad payments, which are kind of a 3 monthly peak demand kind of management system at network level. But I think the understanding is, however these things change, they will still remain in some form and will always have a value attached to them.
I think that's right. I mean, ultimately, what you call it and how it pays out and what the level of it is going to change. And I think that's something that we're quite excited about by lawyers, because we have to build our flexibility into our contracts. So in a way that we approach kind of doing documentation has to reflect the kind of multiple ways a battery can be put to use. It's a flexible bit of kit. It does loads of stuff. It makes money in a whole load of different ways. And, the way we approach our legal drafting has to reflect that. But more importantly, I think the point's right, is that overall, the drivers for the market are not going away. If anything, they're getting more pronounced. And yes, National Grid is going through the process of trying to simplify the way it procures some of its balancing services, its frequency services. And that should, we believe, produce a much more sort of refined and easily comprehensible and more accessible services market. And in a way, that might take away some of the margin for the aggregators. We don't know, but what's certain in my head is it's not going to disappear. There is still going to be a market there. There will still be a demand. We're not going to deploy sufficient numbers of batteries in that 2 to 3 year period to mean that actually all of that is dealt with. It's not going to be the case. So I think it's it is saying to the investment community, guys, yes, we can't put a number on that, or not. At least it's a range. We have to look at the market generally. But you know what? You're an investor. There is some risk in there. And I think one of the only sort of major takeaway I suppose we'll have from some of our dealings is that investors do have to take some risk. Where that lies and how we apportion it, clearly other parties will take other degrees of risk. But I think to be an investor and want to take no risk is not an investor.
Not really an investor.
And I think you need to get into a different game.
Yeah.
So where there is a bit of risk, but there's a lot of upside that goes with that risk. And I think here we are in a market that can only go in one direction, as far as I see. And actually taking a slightly more holistic and pragmatic view of what the opportunity is will really pay dividends. And I think who dares wins in that scenario.
Excellent. Chris, thank you very much for your time.
Not at all. Thanks very much.